Hey,
Hey Dan,
hi, how are you?
good. How you doing?
Good.
Christine, how are you
Good,
doing?
good.
Christine, where are you based?
I am just about 30 minutes south of Nashville in Tennessee, so a small town. Actually, I don't even know where the town is called College Grove.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about you?
I'm based in London.
You're
Yeah.
in London?
Yeah,
Oh,
for
okay.
some reason.
Oh, what about you? Am I saying your name correctly, please?
Yeah, it's Noam.
Okay.
I live in Tel Aviv.
Oh, Tel Aviv.
Yeah,
Nice. Very cool.
I have many colleagues in Tel Aviv,
Mhm.
because Sneak is founded by a lot of
Oh,
Israelis, basically. So
you had a chance then, Dan, to visit Tel Aviv?
I would love to go visit Tel Aviv at some point. I got to visit Tel Aviv when I was working at Telefonica, and we had a software R&D group that was based there because of an acquisition, and such a great city.
yeah, I love it. We have some action right now, out of protest.
Yeah, I've been reading about it. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Okay. Yeah, I've been there twice, once for personal one for work. So yeah, I love it. Yeah.
yeah. Basically, everyone in Tel Aviv is either a engineer or DevOps engineer. That's, that's all the options.
Only two options.
So I don't know if Krob is going to join today.
The reason I thought he might is because he said the meeting is in an hour. He said in Slack.
Yeah,
Yeah. So that was the only reason I think he might.
I can play Krob.
All right. Yeah, I'm sure.
Well, everybody mark your attendance in the spreadsheet, and do we have any new friends?
Very,
Very respectful, by the way. Grove is awesome.
so mark your attendance. Oh, let me drop the
Oh yeah, yeah, I know.
ahead.
This is we're just in the regular best practices working group meeting notes. There's a
Right.
section for us. Yeah.
Right.
Give it a couple more minutes, I suppose. I have so many tabs. Why do I have so many tabs? Well, we can get, what do you think? Shall we start?
Yeah. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so.
Okay. So does anybody want to take notes today?
I can take notes.
Okay.
Where are the notes usually taken? Under the agenda?
Yeah,
Oh.
there's a notes bullet
Oh,
point.
guide notes. Guide notes.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
All right.
And shall we jump in and just talk about, we've got two agenda points really to talk about. One of them is some work that I did, and then another one is some work that you did, Christine, I think.
Yeah.
So. Right. And shall we talk about, let me just jump in and I can talk about what I did. earlier, which is basically just rearranging content that GNOME provided. So this is all just it's just rearranging things in a way, but also came to led me to some interesting questions when I was doing it. So this is the prepared document. And basically what I did is I took the organizational structure that GNOME put together in the spreadsheet, and I applied that to the markdown to create an org structure that kind of made sense with the items that were, as they were kind of listed out in the different sections in the spreadsheet document. Right, so in doing that, I kind of was hoping to spark conversation, or like, to get people thinking basically about how we can organize the content in the document, right? So if we have like an intro paragraph, and then we have these different sections which are like I kind of adapted the work that GNOME did. So GNOME listed members, or sorry, organization, repository, members, CI/CD, server, and miscellaneous. And I kind of adapted that into members, access control and permissions, organizational management, repository configuration, CI/CD, but spelled out, and then server config, which I guess only applies to GitLab, and then miscellaneous I changed to hygiene factors, and I moved a couple of things around. So for instance, I moved scorecards out of, I forget where it was before, I think it was in repository configuration, into hygiene factors, because I felt like that's the kind of thing that I think of as a open source hygiene factor. It's like the scorecard is effectively that, right? So so it's kind of like other, and then I also played around with the idea that every single one of these items in the table of contents should have an annotation, and probably more like an icon, but I just put these in here as a placeholder for being either, applicable to GitHub and GitLab, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if we go down a little bit, so I actually reorganized some of the content into this as well, into this format as well. So if we look at members, access control and permissions, you scroll down to members, access control and permissions, then we get the the best practice statement, the severity, and then I added an applicability thing here saying it's applicable to GitHub and GitLab. We have the description, we have a threat sample, and then the remediation. And this is where I think we actually need we need like remediation for GitLab, we need remediation for, like what are the steps for GitLab, what are the steps for GitHub, I guess, where they're different. And again, I did this for kind of like some number of the first 10 or so things in the table of contents, basically, just to see what it would look like. In doing so, I also came up with some thoughts or questions, like for instance, we have here under number 17, under organizational management, Dependabot monitoring should be enabled, and like from a perspective of making it a vendor neutral, I changed that to dependency monitoring. And then, when we actually go to I didn't make the change in the actual text itself, right? But I was thinking we could change that text to kind of make it a little bit more vendor neutral and say Dependabot is one example. There are other examples as well. and then there are certain things where I thought like for instance, here under organizational management, we're talking about two-factor authentication should be enforced for the organization. And I have a question, should that be, would it be better to organize that under kind of access control and permissions? Because I kind of feel like it's important to have a section about access control. Maybe moving all the items that have to do with 2FA into one section to really reinforce that. There are a couple other things here, like, again, there's another thing about two-factor authentication under server config in that section. And a couple of other things like, is this in the right section? Should it be moved to the, everything here is in the sections that it was in, because that's how it was listed in the spreadsheet, basically. So, but I had a few questions about where moving things around. But I really kind of wanted just to bounce that off of the group before making any further work on it. And as well, I guess the question I have for Noam is, could he set up the markdown generation to kind of spit things out in this format or in this organization, rather, with so then that way we're not, we can have both we don't have to fork away from the automated or from the database content, basically. So that's kind of where I am right now on that.
Well, that looks really good.
That looks great. Sure, I can modify the generation process to whatever we like.
Yeah.
Maybe I can just add the tags that you specified, and also in our project, so it'd be easier, like member access and permissions and etc. So it'd be aligned with our work here. But basically, the idea, I tried to keep it as similar as possible to the configuration pages in GitHub and GitLab. So it'd be easy for the consumer to address the issues. So if there in the organization page you have enable two-factor for everyone, I put the configuration under organization. But I'm cool with either way.
Yeah, I mean, it should be that way. It should be oriented towards the user, towards the reader of the document, right? And making it as easy for them as possible. Absolutely. I guess the other thing I was thinking was adding a placeholder for some of these introductory paragraphs, so that underneath organizational management, a bit of a blurb about this is what organizational management is all about and why it's important, or something like that. But yeah, optional. But how about the thing about where you have a best practice which is applicable in both GitHub and GitLab? Do you feel like that's the right approach, to have it kind of called out in the table of contents, and also have like, this is the best practice, this is how you do it in GitHub, this is how you do it in GitLab, because that diverges from the previous organization, right?
Yeah, I think maybe we can think on creating like two documents, one which is general about the ideas we want to push, and the second one is like specific for the SCM. So because if you are a GitHub user and you have to jump from policy to policy and like skip the GitLab ones, it might be hard to consume it.
Unless there's some way to generate it such that you can generate one that's specific just for GitHub.
Yeah,
Yeah.
creating an automation. So we keep these tags and then we generate one for GitHub and one for GitLab.
Or maybe 3, right? One which is the central document where you go, but it's a bit and 2, one for GitHub and one for GitLab, and then, but it's a bit annoying if I go to the use case that you just described, Noam. If I'm a GitHub user and I just want to go over the policies, then I have to skip back and forth between the central document and the one that lists the actual steps to remediate.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, I guess that's why I was thinking, making it very clear visually when you're going through the document, which things are applicable to which SCM, using an icon or some other kind of, an indication would help, because then you know to skip that thing if it's not applicable to your chosen SCM. But I think do we think that there are a class of user of this document that might be interested in configuring both things, like where, yeah, right.
Personally, I was going to say no, just because I think most folks would be central. Again, it's one of those.
Yeah, the way you might see both is if there is like acquisitions coming in and some folks have been using GitHub and been using GitLab. I'm assuming at the end of the day, they want to consolidate them, but who knows?
Oh, but the typical user.
Yeah, typical now.
Is a single SCM. No.
So I think it's boiled down to what is the deviation between the SCMs. Like if we find out like it's only 5 policies that are specific to GitHub, it might be okay to have one document. But if it turns out to be like 50, so it might be better to split it to 2 documents.
Yeah, but even in a single document, there is a great variance between the first proposition and what Dan just proposed, right? In how, like in the original document, it was all the GitHub policies and then all the GitLab policies. And personally, I feel it's more easily consumable this way, where I see all the policies and then can diverge according to the specific use case I'm looking for.
Another option is to have have it be one document, but well, I was going to say just have the table of contents, or just have a couple of different tables of contents that link through, that have internal links within the document through to the same content, so that you can view it as I want to see all the stuff relevant to GitHub, or you can view it as I want to see all the I'm not sure. I'm not having that. I mean, yeah, I'm not sure, Christine.
Maybe it's just me.
Sometimes GitHub or sometimes CryptPad gets confused, and I find that I need to close the browser and reopen.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
But Yeah, I see.
No worries. I'll try it out later.
Okay, all right. Shall we shift agenda points and talk through the document that Christine put
Yeah.
up, and I can take notes during that session.
Okay. And it may or may not help with some of the questions that you're asking right now. So I'm just going to share my screen,
Okay.
but the link, I'll put it in the chat. All right. So folks can see this?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so for context, there's ongoing work just to try to make sure that we are within F5 kind of like aligned in terms of like how we're organizing the GitHub assets, and this document is supposed to help that. Very much GitHub specific. So just kind of like to quickly walk through. There might be some assumptions here that may or may not apply to other folks, and I stripped around a lot of things that are related to F5. So because there's a confusion between GitHub organizations and how do you call the person who might be running this, I'm calling it company, not like the, and then I also have, because it's F5 specific, there are these sort of different audiences that would be consuming this document. One is like operations, because within the way we're structured, the ops teams might be the ones who have to like, could you add a new member? Could you create a repo? Could you, things like that they typically handle that. Then I'm part of the open source program office, or OSPO, and so we are the ones who are sort of like the ones who know what should and should not. If somebody wants to turn on a repo, we're kind of like the gatekeepers in some way. So we play a role. So that's one different audience. And then the third audience is project maintainers. So so the rest of so this document's kind of like, it might be like a mix and a match of like addressing those three audiences. So it might seem a little jumbled up at the beginning, but it might help. And then I just talk, the rest of the section is organizing the guidelines into organizations, into repos. And then after that, there's like a section around operations. So operations is meant to like address those folks who are going to do like the ops types work. So under organizations, a lot of this will be familiar, but to your point, Dan, there's usually a blurb in the beginning which talks about like what we want to do for organizations, the usual thing about we want to make sure things are secure. And then in here, then I talk about what are generally organizing, like what are requirements for things. All organizations should be under like one central GitHub enterprise account. Only employees of the company can be members. Two-factor authentication must be enabled. And then I kind of go into some of like managing roles and access. And here we say who should be the ones who even kind of get to decide who are the org owners, because that's typically important. And then we talk about only things like only company employees can be organization members. I don't know if that's something that's in the guide, that I don't think doesn't necessarily have to be in the guide that Gnome did, but it's important if you're like a company or whatever, the entity managing all these GitHub orgs. And then all things like non-employees who need access should have elevated permission. So there's things around like just employees that are not really part of the original doc. Then
I think there's some stuff.
Yeah.
There's some stuff in here about external, collaborators versus external contributors, which might map onto that somehow. But yeah.
I got it. Oh, okay, so similar thing, external collaborators would be folks who are not, I don't know, however you want to term it, yes. That would help. Then just talk about like the access control and things like only organization owners can create public repos, because usually you want things under some process. And that's another assumption, that there is a process in how things actually become public. And so that's why there might be more of a lean towards that. And some people may not actually do things this way, but that is an assumption that's in this document. I'll pause just
the process by which by which software is made open source.
Yeah. And this
Yeah,
may.
it's funny because I was just, before getting on this call, I was just going through that with an internal team and helping them to bring one of their things, to make one of their repos public. So yes.
Yeah, and there may or may not be a process, but this is assuming there is. So there's some assumptions that are in this, that this document flows through that I haven't stated explicitly, but if there is a process, then you probably want to limit who can actually make repos public. And then also things like certain folks could only be allowed to create private and internal repos, especially if you want control over repo creation for whatever reason. You may or may not. And then we also said things like organization members' access to new repos should be restricted by default. Again, it may not be something that your organization or your company wants to do, but that's kind of like how we wanted to play it out. Mention two-factor here as well under managing roles and access. Make sure that this is there. And then we talk about things like use access control to manage members for inactive members or ex-employees. So best practices, removing members from GitHub orgs who are no longer employees. They can be converted to external outside collaborators, downgrade global admin or owner privilege for people who have no activities in the past 6 months, which maps to stuff from like Legitify. Then we talk about GitHub Actions and just like things like the most restrictive permissions by default, and restrict GitHub Actions to known repos in the GitHub orgs, and restrict repos to only use GitHub Actions from GitHub and Marketplace. Verified creators, very much, I think, in line from what's in the policy that Anom contributed. So that's organizations. I'll pause just in case there's any questions on that, but this is kind of like the structure. All right.
Looks great.
Pardon?
Looks great.
Yeah.
Very detailed.
Yeah. Then going into organization repos, here there's like a little more like a preamble. Again, this is very much because this is like open source program office sort of leading this, where you want some element of discoverability and grouping. So that's why we start talking about, like, even before talking about like how and the security and all, we talk about like where should projects be grouped under orgs. So it may, again, not be relevant to the folks who are reading like the other document that we may put up. So it's not really SCM related. This is more like, I don't know what you want to call it. Just, it's very much specific to how you want to set up things. But basically, if you're organizing a whole bunch of repos, you just want to make sure that your orgs make sense and the repos that are going into those orgs make sense. Because at some point, you may want to signal to the external community that these are only like sample projects and you're not really maintaining these. These are like the really good projects, and therefore there is some expectation of maintenance. So that's where some of this section is talking about. So I'll kind of like skip over that because it might not be relevant to the guide that we want to put together that's SCM related. So that's why we talk about things like private repos lasting longer than 6 months should be evaluated and deleted. It's not really related to SCM. So I'll skip to the other ones, which is more in line with what we may be interested in. So under repos that just have like requirements, the ones we know: protected branches, use branches to make pull requests, enable secret scanning alerts, access roles must be managed with accordance to the policies. And I kind of have them requirements. And then I say best practices like use a security scanning tool, enable security alerts for GitHub repos. And then I have actually down at the end, we've got like an appendix, which has like a detail, like step-by-step for how to actually implement some of the things that we are talking about. Then under managing roles and access, we just say that we want to organize things in terms of in teams. So if somebody actually creates a new repo, we'll create different kinds of teams. Like one is almost like a maintainer team with this maintain role permissions. One would be like a write, which is only like useful in certain scenarios, but a write role permission. And then one, maybe they're helping out with triaging. You could have a triage. And then one with read only if it's a private repo. So this is a way to kind of organize things in relevant teams. And then we also state that non-employees can only be added as outside collaborators to a repo. And that's like things like if somebody needs elevated access to, say, do something like triaging. And again, this is related to maybe more like operations and how you set up a new project. We talk about things like if there is a process for getting a project ready for launch, this is what you should do. Said we recommend projects run through scorecard and remediate any issues and get a score above 7. And then we say, consider setting up a scorecard GitHub actions to get alerts. And then we also say we recommend project signal status using repostatus.org badges, and at a minimum active, inactive, and unsupported should be used. And then in the future, maybe tooling can be developed to help maintainers flag status. So that's kind of like the repo section. I'll pause for any questions.
I think it's great, and I think that the section about how to manage organizations and teams and how to assign permissions for those, it's relevant for not only for open source. I think it's a struggle for organization. From what I know, what I've seen, it's more like one big organization with everyone inside, and some collaborators has access through Teams, and some have direct access, and there is a big mess in this area. And I think adding such section could be great.
Yeah, because the way we used to do it back at when I was at Facebook is when we had teams like that set up, then eventually we actually built tooling through the GitHub API on top of that, which then allowed the project owner to add and remove people to the relevant teams. That way they could self-service, and it made it a lot easier. And so then we could get out of the way. But organizing in teams, not only did it make everything a lot clearer, but it allowed us to do better self-service. All right. Then jumping into the kind of like the last remaining session, it just talks about operations, and it's really for the folks who are going to be operating things. We just tell them things like you should turn on GitHub Insights should be used. We talk about the GitHub audit log should be tracking member activities and procedures. Any security procedures should be reviewed and updated annually. Clear communication incidents response plan must be established, and regular security audits and vulnerability assessments should be conducted. Then we talk about best practices around security alerts, vulnerability scanning, again, talking about insights. We go into the GitHub advanced security features for any private or internal repos. Then here, this is what I was mentioning too, where if we have like internal tools, and this is internal to the company, if they were able to use internal tools and go through, say, GitHub API that might have like some advanced token permissions, then you could streamline some of tasks that you may not want to grant to the ops team, and then avoid giving the owner access. But that's just something that is it's a nice to do, but it might not everyone be able to do that. And as I mentioned before, I talked about self-service tools. If community management needs to happen, you could actually make that available through a different UI for maintainers, and then that avoids giving maintainers elevated GitHub permissions. And then automated alerts and tools. Then the next few sections are talking about how do you set up a new GitHub org, how do you set up a new GitHub repo, and this is much maybe process oriented depending on how things are set up, like, get sign off, add any folks who need to be as owners, and then I say configure the required settings, which is in the appendix, and configure the recommended settings in the appendix. And then also setting up a GitHub repo, very short. It's just like, again, if the project needs to make public, if there's approval been given, and then just basically configure the right settings and have whoever's requesting access to be like the maintainer role access. And then the last bit, we haven't kind of like gone through and figured out how do you archive a repo, because there's thoughts around that. But then there's a section about what kind of like what the resources used. It's like obviously GitHub documentation, scorecard, Legitify, the concise guide for developing more secure software and repo status. The rest of this section is very much like, how do you do this? How do you do that? If you want to turn on 2F, this is straight out of Legitify mostly. Go to this, do that. So that's the rest of it. So somebody could jump through after reading the doc and say, oh, I want to do this. I can go here. So that's kind of like the main, this is basically it. And so the section is just the GitHub org session and the GitHub repo settings. And it's just a list of like into like required and recommended. And these are like, we figured it out based on like the high, low, medium, like tags from like Legitify, as well as just like our own thinking around the whole process. But that's the guide.
Do you have internal links from the top bit to the bottom bit?
Oh yeah, like for example from here. Oh, sorry, from like for example this one.
Yeah. Okay. Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that
like,
links down to. Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is very prescriptive because what we had in mind is that somebody's going to go in, maybe they're in the ops team, assuming it's manual, and they'll just have to like just do this.
You don't have any of the Git, because you're using GitHub, you don't have any of the GitLab stuff in here, right?
No, that's why I said this is very much GitHub specific. It would have been nice to see if there's something GitLab, and then to your point, see, okay, what is in common? If it's like the same mindset, what would be in common? Yeah, I don't know much about GitLab.
Because I'm thinking, it's got me thinking about another organizational, because Noah mentioned having 3 documents. Well, the other thing we talked about is maybe having like the document be 2-part, like your document here.
Mhm.
And I so now I'm kind of thinking like maybe we should do it being like, well, just basically adopt your organizational structure, but then at the bottom of the document have GitHub stuff, GitLab stuff as 2 separate kind of subsections or sections of the document. And then from the top matter, we link to the specific things like it'll be talking about, why 2-factor authentication is important, and maybe some additional factors around that, and then like a little indicated link, GitHub more info, GitLab more info, right? And then that links down to the bottom of the to the specific area of the document that talks about it, that's applicable to your SCM.
Yeah, 2FA as an example, right?
Yes.
If you just know that you need 2FA, then I guess, but you're talking about like, because I think what could be useful, like I said, most of the links were mainly around like, okay, if you want to do more, go to GitHub org settings. So if you want to set up a new GitLab I don't know if they call it organization in GitLab. They probably don't.
Other reactions, thoughts?
I like your idea of like 2 sections. So I want to, like, if I understand correctly what you meant, it's members and permissions, for example, then the specific policies link to GitHub, link to GitLab, which points to a different section. And then if we have some policies that are specific to GitHub or GitLab, we'll have only one link on the side. Yeah. Or under another section, maybe you have like only GitHub, only GitLab, with links to the specific section of the document. I think I like this structure.
Do you by chance make it so that this document has suggest access for the world? So that anybody can add comments,
Okay, so what would I do to do that?
share,
Suggest.
and then anyone with the link is given permission to suggest. So give the viewer drop down. Commenter.
Hmm.
Yeah, and then done. And that will make it so that anybody can make comments on this document. Thank you.
All right, perfect. Thanks for the reminder. I meant to do that. Forgot.
But
Yep.
this is a copy that's intended for external.
Yeah, it's external.
Okay.
So if you want to comment on it, do any.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right, okay.
The only other little bit of feedback is that when you're posting this, I saw this in the vulnerability disclosures working group. If you post this link in the email thread for this working group, include a PDF version, because there are certain banks that can't access Google Docs. So just, whenever you share it into the email thread, include a PDF version of it, including, yeah.
Okay.
Easy solution to that. Never use email. That's what I do.
So is it common practice to, after this, like, share this in a
Yeah, the
PDF?
work, if you have a proposal for a standard or something you want to become a policy, something like that, getting reviews, and is this a document coming from the Linux Foundation, or is this a document that's who drafted it?
This is a very opinionated F5 GitHub Asset Management Guide. So not coming from.
Okay, all right. So
Yeah, so this is to help us in our as we're noodling through what the SCM guide should look like.
Okay, yeah.
It's
So
input,
this is something that
it's
you-
an
this is
input
something that
into
you want.
the discussion here.
Yes, if you want to make this a standard proposal for what this group will put forward, then yes, that is the best practice to share it in the email as well.
Gotcha. I think it's going to end up, right now it's in CryptPad, and then it might end up, it's going to end up in like Markdown.
Yeah. Well, I think
For live edits, before it turns into Markdown, it's better to do the live edits and live reviews in Google Docs, unless, well, there's a discussion about that, but currently the best practice is to do the review with everybody in Google Docs, so then you can live update and then turn it into a Markdown, and then future reviews and changes come in via pull request.
Yeah.
Crow, any thoughts from any wise words?
Regarding,
The whole thing.
I like the progress.
Organization of the
I gave you
document, what you think, how you think the users should how you think the information should be engaged with or organized so that people can engage with it better.
I think historically people have used Google Docs because it's free and generally widely accessible.
Sorry, no, I mean, sorry, I was talking more about the question of should it be once we publish it, should it be should we be organizing things more like the way that Christine's document is organized, where there's like general front matter, and then we go into SCM specific things underneath, or
I thought we had originally talked about structuring the document around kind of the secure principles. So you should use multi-factor authentication. And then you would provide those specifics on here's how to do it in GitHub. Here's how to do it in GitLab, and kind of talk about the nuances, how it might be named differently.
right, but I think that the proposal, sorry, go ahead.
No. I'm involved in an internet flame war right now. I'm trying to manage, so I have not paid this meeting my full attention.
No worries.
I'm
The internet has
that you're
feelings
involved in a flame war.
I've been reading said feelings. It's a hornet's nest.
Oh, okay. All right.
I'm glad I'm not involved.
Yeah.
Right. It's best to be not. But no,
Yeah.
so I have not paid full attention on kind of what we've talked about today.
Yeah.
I'm glad to take a look at if we have one or two suggested paths forward, I will give that some consideration.
So I guess the
Early
the
Monday, if you'd like.
Yeah, the nuance here is, we have talked about, and I think we're kind of agreeing that we should have that structure where we talk about the general principles and then link off to and then say, here's how you do it in GitHub, here's how you do it in GitLab. But I think one thing that we need to resolve is, should we be doing that in line, or should we be linking off to to subsections of the document, which in themselves are, here are all the principles for GitHub, here are all the principles for GitLab. And then it's really, you're the only time you're seeing both is when you're reading through the kind of the front part of the document, which is kind of how Christine's is organized. And I'm starting to kind of like,
If you're a GitHub user, you want to go through all the GitHub insights. If you're a GitLab user, you want to go through all the GitLab insights, right? Like, you don't want to go through one document having to break out into individual subsections for, like, you don't have to go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, right? If you're a GitHub user, you're using GitHub, right? If you're going to do GitLab setup, you're using GitLab. Like, those should be distinct documents with the best practices for each. I think, like, maybe they have a union point that is coalesced into a central document, but like all of the Google or all of the GitHub stuff should be in one document that may link to the equivalents. There might be like some parent document that links to the subsections of that, maybe.
So
Yeah.
with the C and C++ compiler work has very similar challenges, where we have GCC and CLang and the Intel compiler and the Microsoft compiler. So how they are solving that problem is we have we have like an overview of here's the best practices, and then we have TLDR tables. So if you are a GCC user, here's a list of those particular options we're endorsing. And if you're a CLang or an Intel or a Microsoft compiler, they'll have their dedicated artifacts. So that could be a separate markdown file. It could be a separate section in one document. We want to think about the maintainability, because we don't want this to become somebody's full-time job having to administer the doc. So I would advise whatever is the simplest path for maintainability, whether it's one or multiple docs. If it's simpler to have a dedicated doc for GitLab and a dedicated doc for GitHub, and cite those out of a master principles list, great. If you think it's better as one doc, great. Just right now, I haven't had enough time to really think through.
Yeah, I like what Jonathan Crow was saying, is that like maybe there's some principles in common, like two-factor authentication, like one or two or three, whatever, how many things, and that could be in the overview, and then you link into specific separate docs, one for GitLab and one for GitHub.
And Noam is saying to himself, this is how it was to begin with.
Yeah.
So we've come full circle.
I love
don't
this
think
thing,
that's, I don't think
Well,
that's the case. I think
And we're a little separate from Gnome's. Gnome is actually the practical application. Here, ingest these files and you can set these configs, as opposed to we're writing more of a guidance document, a little bit more narrative.
Yeah, for sure. I suggested in the beginning to have like separate documents for GitHub and GitLab. So I like how this stand around.
But in going through the all the items in your spreadsheet, I noted that there are a lot of things that have both GitHub and GitLab ticked, right? So there are a lot of common elements, and so if we wanted to, especially in repository members, mostly. So,
which you could generify to
right,
access control best practices. And
Yeah.
the fact that they use different words and are structured differently is, an academic exercise of structuring that.
But the benefit of doing it in the way where, well, I don't know whether it's separate documents or separate sections within one single document, but one benefit of doing it that way is that we could have the editorial stuff, which is kind of more hand curated up at the top, and then all of the actual best practice listings be auto-generated from the Legitify data. So that way we're to your point, Krub, we're more we're aiding the maintainability of the document, because the best practice things themselves can, as long as we reliably know what the internal link structure will be, then we can link to it from the front matter, reliably, and still regenerate that part of the document, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, I see it.
I think one action item could be to take what Christine has done, or what Christine has kind of contributed, and see if it can be
Turn
applied
into that
to
front
both.
one.
Sorry, go ahead.
You want to turn it into that front matter that you're thinking
Yeah,
about?
turning it into that, basically adapting that to the front matter that we're talking about, and then showing how, because you have the link to the GitHub best practice, showing how it could look if we have link to GitHub best practice, link to GitLab best practice, side by side links, for some of those internal links. And we can work on that in as an evolution of the document that you've contributed, or that you of the Google Doc that you put together.
Okay. Sounds good. What are we going to do with the crypt pad that you had?
Well, it was always really a scratch pad to show ideas. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know if it's necessary to, I mean, I can keep it around and we can use it as a reference point. But I think that let's make the focus the Google Doc for now, for kind of organizing it, and then we can keep in mind, though, that the intention is for the best practices themselves, the individual bullet points for GitHub and GitLab that will be generated out of the Legitify data.
Okay.
General question. Do you know if Google Docs support Markdown, like copy?
I thought somebody told me they did, and then I tried to get it to support Markdown, and it was not working for me. So
There is a Markdown live editor called Chrome, remind me, Attack something.
well, that's why we were using CryptPad, because CryptPad allows for get Markdown live editing. It's not WYSIWYG. You have two things, one side by side. You're editing the Markdown, and you can see the rendered version.
Maybe we can try to use Notion. I think you can.
Shall we introduce more tools?
I have plenty of those. Yeah.
I like Notion.
Yeah, because you can paste Markdown and it works directly. And maybe I think they also have export to Markdown. So, and you can comment and have a history. So maybe it could be a good solution to put in.
Yeah, I guess based on what Jonathan had suggested, that people want to probably stick with Google for now.
Okay.
I do think that the eventual output of this will be one or a couple markdown files. So that's
Yeah, yeah. So after you get it to a certain state, it moves to Markdown. Yeah. So anyone who wants access to this Google Doc, because right now it's just only commented, just send me a request.
So the setting under the preferences at Google Docs to support Markdown, that didn't work.
So under preferences,
Yeah. Tools,
yes.
preferences.
Yeah, it didn't support it in the way that I thought it should support it. It was so, or maybe I just couldn't get it to work. It's always possible.
Or detect Markdown.
Yeah, it was more like if you start typing Markdown, then it will automatically format it for you as a format rather than, yeah, I want to be able to paste Markdown in. I want to be able to export this. I want to be able to just export this as Markdown. That was more the functionality that I was looking for. And it didn't seem to be built in. There is a Markdown plugin for Google Docs, but it was not working very well for me. So I ended up deleting it. Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't work very well.
Okay.
Okay.
Only there were a standard.
All right.
Okay, so I think we've got an action point
Mhm.
to kind of, let's take it to the Slack and then see if we can iterate on this document, and maybe we can figure out a way to easily export it to Markdown and start iterating on it that way. But at this point, let's just start working on it in the GitHub doc that Christine shared, and then we can see where we get to, basically. Okay.
All right.
Okay.
And Noam, is there some way for you to maybe add for you to regenerate the Markdown with specific anchors? I actually don't know how to do an anchor in Markdown, but with anchors that you can then link to internally within a document. So once we let's take that, I guess, also to Slack to discuss. But I'm just thinking, like, if we could regenerate the Markdown, the list of the different best practices, with anchors for each one, then that would make it easier to link internally to it from front matter.
Yeah. So right now it's every title is linkable. So you have the table of contents. So basically it's anchored.
Okay.
I guess unless you wanted to make it fixed, because the title could change, that might be what Dan might be also.
Like the policy names, you mean?
Oh, you think it might not change, just in case oh, that's okay.
Yeah, I think it's fine as long as it's anchored. Then, yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts before we close up?
Thank you, everybody. I appreciate your work on this. It's worthwhile, important stuff.
All right.
I'm hoping I feel like this is a good direction. We had to kind of like, we still need to do, I think, a little bit of research and development between us to come up with some answers to these questions, but we're getting there. We will get a document out there. We're not going to just keep rearranging the chairs. So thanks.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Thanks.